Give me 30 seconds. Sorry. So we are back on the record. You remain under oath. And thank you, Mr. D'Angelo, Shaughnessy, or man? Cross-example.
One housekeeping thing, Your Honor. It's just been brought to our attention for the third time today that the live streaming is recording the attorneys speaking during the breaks. We have inquired and talked to the recording system people about this. Just wanted to bring it to the court's attention. We're trying to be careful about that.
Well, there shouldn't be a mic sufficient to hear your private conversations anyway. I think there's nothing in the order about the camera remaining on during a break, but there is something in the order about not catching the audio of counsel's conversation.
I'll be clear, Judge. It's the audio that's picking up, and I want to make sure that the court is aware of that, and we have brought it to their attention, and it is bringing it up on past pre-breaks here.
So if you just keep the audio off during a break, I don't care if the camera's on or not. I don't suppose the parties do either, but
I don't think anyone's recorded anything during the breaks.
Well, we can.
We're receiving text messages telling us what we're saying.
Right. I will say this. For the moment, we're not going to have another break today other than the end of the day break, but we'll figure this out between now and 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Cross or something else?
Just something else quickly. Over the break, we had an opportunity to look at the Kimmy decision.
Well, hold on before you go any further. It does nothing then tell me what I already know. I'm not too worried about the Kimmy decision.
I'll sit down. Thank you.
Cross-exam by the defense by Mr. D'Angelo?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
You were one of the investigators involved in this case from BCI.
Yes, sir.
Agent Kolar was the main case agent?
Yes, sir.
And you were under him?
Yes, sir.
You indicated that you interviewed witnesses and you also participated in the gathering and reviewing of evidence?
Yes, sir.
As part of the gathering of evidence, I think you testified in part that you went along the route and secured video footage, security footage depicting cars that were involved in the pursuit, correct?
I did not partake in that, but
right.
It was done, yes, sir.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to ultimately review any of that video?
Not as it was being collected. Towards the end, various parts were reviewed, and the compilation was reviewed also.
Did you ever hear the radio broadcast tapes in this case?
I remember listening to a couple of the radio channels. I don't recall listening to all of them.
Okay. As part of the investigation, did the task force obtain all the radio broadcast tapes from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th district?
Yes, those were obtained by somebody.
And was a timeline made of the broadcasts that are relevant to the pursuit and the ultimate incident in East Cleveland?
Yes, sir.
approach, Your Honor?
Sure.
Show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit L. Could you look at that and identify it if you can?
Defendant's Exhibit L is a copy of the timeline. This was generated by our intelligence unit, taking radio traffic and transcriptions provided by the Cleveland PD radio room and assembling it in a linear fashion for channels 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Could you explain how that's set up on that document?
What this is, starting on page 1, listing the case number. The title is Cleveland PD Chase Timeline, source Cleveland PD radio transmissions, starting with the dates and times that were attached to the transmissions on the various channels, showing how some of the conversations and radio transmissions overlapped, starting at 10:33:21 with Officer Nan. Old Chevy on St. Clair just popped around as went by. Old Blue Chevy on Superior on Prospect. Then the radio transmissions continue on Channel 2 and Channel 3. And, excuse me, as the pursuit continues, the different radio traffic from the various units on the different channels, District 1, District 2, District 3. There was also some notes in between the approximate location of where the pursuit was. This continues on for the duration of the pursuit. And this ends, the last transmission is 3rd District at 11:37:19. Conversation between cars to be advised we found a case in here. We're shutting down St. Clair and dispatch acknowledging it.
So that timeline contains all relevant broadcasts from all the police districts noted therein, from the initial call by Officer Nan to after the shooting incident in East Cleveland, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it contains graphically the broadcasts were made and the time that they were made, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it shows the overlap in time when broadcasts are made among the various districts.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was that document, is that a true and accurate copy of the timeline that was prepared by BCI in this case?
Yes, sir. I believe the original was in color.
Okay. And is that part of the investigative file in this case?
Yes, sir. I believe it was.
Did you or another agent of BCI satisfy yourself that the CPD transcriptions were accurate?
I don't believe it was a BCI agent. I believe it was one of the other task force members that went over and verified the transmissions.
Okay. Pardon me.
And from your participation in this matter, was it determined that those transmissions were accurate?
Yes, sir.
And is the authoring agent's name indicated at the bottom right?
Yes, sir. That is IA Intelligence Analyst Chuck Thomas. He's now the supervisor of the unit.
Okay. Now, as part of the task force, would the members confer with one another from time to time as the investigation progressed?
Yes, sir. What we started doing was every morning would be a quick briefing, going over different things learned from the different parties, what was gleaned from interviews, anything the crime scene unit found while processing the vehicles involved, things like that.
And did part of those conversations deal with any issues that came up because of difficulties in the transmissions of all the radio broadcasts in this case?
I don't understand exactly what you mean, sir.
Well, in reviewing the radio broadcast, did investigators determine that there was some confusion at times and whether or not the broadcast would be received by all officers as it went out on the air?
I believe there was some notice about some of the officers talking over each other.
Okay. And if now officer talks over another officer, what the broadcasting officer is saying may be interfered with, correct?
Yes, sir. If one officer talks over a second, the third officer won't understand what's being said.
Okay. And was there also some issue about time delays?
Between information being relayed from one district to another,
Yes.
as I recall.
And what about time delays as information was broadcast in terms of when it was received?
That'd be instantaneous if you're on the same radio channel.
But what if you weren't on the same radio channel?
There would be a delay as the information was relayed through the dispatchers.
Okay. And in this incident, Channel 2, that's the 2nd District, it was utilized as the primary communication channel, correct?
I believe the majority of the traffic was on that, yes, sir.
But information regarding the incident physically relayed from dispatcher to dispatcher in the dispatching center was also broadcast over the district channels, keeping other officers informed who did not change their radios to Channel 2, correct?
Yes, sir.
And would it be a fair statement that during the course of the investigation, investigators learned that multiple officers learned that there was confusion because of the difference in channels and the methods of communication from dispatcher and district to district?
Yes, sir, that's a fair statement.
And this led to some information regarding the incident being heard by some officers, but not by others, correct?
Yes, sir.
And further, there was the time delay between the information being relayed from one channel to another resulted in some officers not receiving information in real time, correct?
Yes, sir.
And therefore, they found themselves acting on information that was no longer current by a matter of seconds to minutes, correct?
Yes, sir, that'd be accurate.
And did the investigators also discover that the Cleveland Police Department policy that prohibits the linking of channels also created issues for other officers in terms of being able to hear everything that was happening?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you reviewed a copy of that policy, didn't you? Did the union provide a copy of the general police order prohibiting the patching in from district to district?
Yes, sir, I believe they did.
You've been in court here throughout the trial, have you not, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you've been here when some of the radio broadcasts have been played, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree, would you not, that it's not always that easy to pick up everything that's broadcasted on these tapes, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, some officer broadcasts were barely discernible on the radio traffic, correct?
I believe there were some garbled comments, yes, sir.
Heightened emotions led to pitch and volume changes from the way one would normally speak, adding to the difficulty of understanding the broadcast, correct?
Yes, sir.
Background noise on both ends of the communications, such as sirens and the monitoring of other frequencies on portable radios, also added to difficulty in hearing and understanding all radio traffic, correct?
Yes, sir, it could.
And the volume of transmissions and problems inherent with radio communications in general were also likely factors in officers not hearing everything that was broadcast on the radio.
Yes, sir, that's possible.
And would it be a fair statement that when investigators were going through the radio dispatch tapes, they were doing it in a controlled environment with the ability to play some transcriptions repeatedly in order to determine what was said, correct?
Yes, sir.
And even when attempting to do that, some broadcasts were still indiscernible.
Yes, sir.
And investigators found that, correct?
What was the last part?
Investigators determined that, right? That some broadcasts were still indiscernible.
Yes, sir.
So, therefore, the mere fact that something was transmitted through radio dispatch does not necessarily that all officers heard or understood what was said, correct?
Yes, sir, that's possible.
And when the investigators spoke to all of the officers, was it also discovered that there was mass confusion at the school at the time that the shooting incident occurred as they were all pulling into the driveway?
Yes, sir.
And that headlights and police strobe lights from a large number of police vehicles were disorienting officers and hampering their view of what was occurring by virtue of blinding and backlighting. You heard that from a number of officers, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
And multiple sirens were sounding, adding to the chaos and making communication difficult, both over the radio and in person. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And in point of fact, that all officers interviewed, including shooters and non-shooters, indicated that they were all in fear of their safety and the safety of their fellow officers.
Yes, sir.
And that,
Objection, Your Honor. He's reading from something. We'd like to know what he's reading from so we can have a copy.
I don't think he's required to do that. He could read from anything. It could be his notes. It could be anything. The witness will either agree or disagree with the propositions asserted on cross.
and further, that even the officers who did not shoot also indicated that they were in fear of their safety and in fear that they'd be shot when they were in the driveway there to school.
Some of them said that, yes, sir.
And that across the board, everyone believed that the occupants of the vehicle were firing at them.
Yes, sir.
Now, from listening to the radio broadcast tapes, Agent Soraya, is it also true that members of the Cleveland Police Department were asking for assistance from other jurisdictions?
Yes, sir. I believe they were calling for stop sticks, the road spikes to puncture tires. I believe somebody asked about the helicopter. I remember those in particular.
And are those valuable tools and matters of this nature?
Yes.
Were you able to determine that in the, respect that, you heard the testimony, did you not, Agent Soraya, of Sergeant Peters in this case?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall when he testified that he looked at his computer in his police vehicle, he was able to pull up the AVL on the screen, and that showed the whereabouts of all the vehicles at that time that were involved in this pursuit?
Yes, sir.
You're aware, are you not, that in the radio dispatch center there's a larger screen that also depicts that type of information in real time?
I did not see that, no, sir.
Okay, so as part of your investigation, you or BCI investigators did not go to the radio dispatch center to investigate what was going on there?
I did not. I believe other members of the task force went and spoke with dispatchers. I don't know if they went there to get copies of the radio traffic or if the radio traffic was sent to them via email.
Okay. So you have no knowledge from reviewing the investigative file in this case, whether or not such information is depicted on a large screen in the radio dispatch center of the city of Cleveland?
No, sir, I do not know that.
You do know, though, sir, do you not, that there was no order to terminate to any 2nd District patrol officers from any supervisor from the 2nd District?
Yes, sir, that is true.
And it also is a fact that at no point did any member of the Cleveland Police command staff, ever get involved in intervening here and calling off the pursuit.
Yes, sir, that's true.
From the chief down to the deputy chiefs, correct?
That's true, sir.
down to the various commanders, correct?
Correct.
And that would involve district commanders, correct?
Correct.
And commanders of other special units, correct?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
And down through the other supervisory rank of captain, no other high-ranking captains throughout the city of Cleveland, as these events unfold, determined that the pursuit should be terminated and made some broadcast to that effect.
That's true.
And in fact, there were supervisors involved in the direct pursuit in this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
Sergeant Coleman at various times was, do you recall how many cars behind the suspect vehicle?
She was the lead vehicle at certain points.
At certain points. And in fact, when she left the district, other members of the 2nd District Vice Unit followed her, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the same occurred in the 3rd District. Sergeant Putman, he was the sergeant in charge of 3rd District Vice that night, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when he heard the broadcast, he felt that the police might need help, and he went out with the assault rifle that is provided to various members of the division. Objection.
Yes, sir.
And he left with that equipment, and a number of his subordinates also went to offer support, correct?
Yes, sir.
So that would be Detective O'Donnell, Erig, and Debchek from 3rd District Vice, correct?
I believe so, yes, sir.
And there were also other officers who had a similar patrol rifle who responded to the scene by virtue of the nature of the radio broadcast. These other officers felt that that might be a valuable tool, so they also responded based on the danger that was presented, correct?
That I don't know. I know Sergeant Putnam did. Anyone else that was assigned a patrol rifle, I don't know.
Okay. Do you recall Patrol Officer Vargas, that he also had a patrol rifle and he responded to the scene? Objection.
Sustained.
I don't recall that, sir.
Agent Soraya, would it be a fair statement that the investigation of this matter was the highest priority of the State Attorney General, and he announced so publicly?
Yes, sir, it was.
And accordingly, all resources available were dedicated to this investigation, correct?
Yes, sir.
What's the approximate number of agents that were involved in this?
I believe at one point we had about 40 agents from across northern Ohio and maybe a couple from London coming up.
And it was established that there would be a timeline that the investigation was held to.
There were goals given as to when they wanted it concluded by.
And what was the goal for the conclusion of the investigation by BCI?
The initial one, I don't recall, was very quick. There was no way we could gather all the information. I know we worked on this for about 10 weeks.
And was we know that the Attorney General held a press conference in February of 2013, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were present for that, correct?
Yes, sir.
And prior to that news conference, within the agency, it was determined that you needed to wrap this thing up by January sometime, 2013, correct?
I believe there was an earlier deadline, yes.
Okay. And so the determination to set up the interviews was made quickly, and you attempted to implement that goal right from the beginning, correct?
The goal to interview the officers?
Yes.
That was a priority, yes, sir.
Okay. And those interviews occurred before any ballistics test results were obtained, correct?
Yes, sir.
And there was no one in your agency who who was conducting these investigations, who had knowledge as to any results of those ballistics tests, because they didn't come back until when? Sometime in January?
I believe it was about the second week, maybe the third week of January, the ballistics test came back.
Okay, so certainly all the Cleveland police officers that submitted to interviews in December of 2012 would have had no way of knowing what ballistics results would be coming in January 2013, correct?
Correct.
Now, I think if I understood your testimony correctly, you indicated that representatives from the Patrolmen's Association cooperated with you in terms of getting officers to go out to Richfield and be interviewed, correct?
Yes, sir. They helped facilitate it, contacted the officers. We worked with them on appointment times, and they facilitated getting the officers there for us.
And you and I had interactions too, correct?
Yes, sir, we did.
And did I help facilitate matters as well?
Yes, sir, you did.
And when I say facilitate, I mean facilitate things for you and other investigators at BCI.
Yes, sir. You helped out in getting the officers there. I believe you gave a stern talking to a couple of them. You were helpful.
These events happened on November 29, 2012. That was a Wednesday or Thursday?
I believe that was a Thursday night, sir.
Thursday night. When was the first communication you had with anyone from the Patrolmen's Association that we want to do these interviews and we want to do them as fast as we can?
I don't believe they contacted me. I believe that contact was either with Agent Kohler or Supervisor Sweet. The contact was made there. I met everybody when you guys showed up in Richfield.
Okay. And the first interview event happened on Thursday, and the first interview occurred Tuesday the following week, correct?
Yes, sir, the 4th.
And did the Patrolmen's Association or any Cleveland police officer or myself tell investigators who we're bringing in and when, and we're calling the shots?
No, sir.
So you told us who you wanted and in what order, and we did everything we could to accommodate you to get those officers there, correct?
I believe we asked for Officer Mann first. That was done, and then we just asked for officers, and you guys made the arrangements for who was available when.
So we facilitated and cooperated with your request, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would it be a fair statement that most if not all of the shooters were interviewed at the early part of the interview process? In other words, beginning on December 4th, and it moved quickly from there.
Yes, sir.
Would it be a fair statement that investigators determined that we should prioritize obtaining the statements from the shooters before we get to the non-shooters?
Yes, sir, that was.
And that's how the investigators determined they would proceed, and you asked for us to get these individuals whose names you gave us, and we brought them out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, all 13 shooters in this case, that is, the 13 officers who discharged their weapons and used deadly force, they were all advised when they came in that their interviews would be videotaped, correct?
I believe we told them that.
And in fact, they were videotaped, correct?
Yes, sir.
Many times at the end of the interview, you'd have to go out and, I don't know what you call it, initializing, or you had to do something technical to shut everything down, then you would come back in the room and would talk on who was coming up next while the officer was still there, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you also had an audio recorder and other recording devices. You had like a backup and one that was put right on the table in plain view of everyone, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you also told the union, myself, and all officers that these were going to be voluntary statements, given under the advisement of their Miranda rights, right?
Yes, sir.
So why don't you tell us what you told the officers?
We ended up with a bit of a routine statement saying that we were here, myself and Detective Gardner would introduce ourselves, who we were, who we represented, that we were assigned to the investigation, that this was a criminal investigation, that they were to be interviewed in regards to the situation. They were going to be advised of their Miranda warnings prior to anything being said. If they had any questions, please ask us. Don't feel insulted at some of the questions. Some of them might seem silly, but we were asking because we needed the officers to articulate back to us. We couldn't put words in their mouth. We also said that some of these are going to be your observations, and that's what we want. If they had any questions to us, ask us. If they had any other concerns and they wanted to pause and confer with counsel, to do so. This was going to be very simple, very straightforward.
And, Your Honor, could I interpose an objection at this time to this plan?
Well, I haven't heard a question. Are you objecting to the last answer?
I'm objecting, Your Honor, to the nature of the questioning by Mr. D'Angelo as a witness who was there and asking for him to agree, and this is a problem that it creates. Now, normally, you know, an attorney can be there and do this. You know, if an attorney attends an interrogation, no problem. But the interesting issue here, and we brought it up before, is that Mr. D'Angelo is also representing the union, and there with the union officers at the same time, he's representing these other witnesses. And what we're going to do is end up with questioning about Mr. D'Angelo and the union as the lawyer for the union when he's there with these other individuals, because no one told the investigators what happened, the key point of what happened, that somebody jumped on the hood and started firing. So this is the conflict. This is where we go.
The objection has been articulated many times over, come to think of it. Yeah. The objection itself is overruled, but questions should be asked not as if you were sitting right there. That, to me, is not a proper way for cross-exam, even though the evidence, the witness has agreed that you were sitting right there. So you wouldn't normally say things like, didn't you and I talk about such and such? Just, did you learn this? Did you learn that? Isn't it true that you gave Miranda? So that kind of thing.
Your Honor, just for the record, Mr. Gutierrez was gracious enough to point out that I was present when he asked questions of this witness, and that's why I'm following him this way. I don't intend to make myself a witness to these proceedings, but he brought it up, and based on other things that have been stated in this trial, not even getting into the pretrial matters, I just felt appropriate to follow up. They brought up the cooperation of everyone, and I wanted to follow up on that.
But to preserve your record, if a question is asked where this objection applies, just say objection or same objection, and I should be alerted as of right now to what you're talking about.
Well, it's not so much the lead. I don't care about the lead and the agreement part and the attorney testifying. It's normal enough, but he's just not the attorney just for the defendant. He's the attorney for the witnesses who are hostile to us. And whether it was his advice or the union's advice, they were not cooperating. They were only answering the questions asked, not the broad question like what happened and help us. And no one told them about the key individual who clearly, or apparently by anybody's viewpoint, caused the deaths.
So
they didn't give the
You're trying to get things in
the
evidence.
most important thing. They didn't, and they all sat there and watched it as police officers. They didn't give other police officers the most important investigation, the most important part of the investigation at all.
This is your closing argument.
But
and you're also trying to get things into evidence that are not necessarily yet in evidence.
Your Honor.
By this. So, please, the word object or the word objection is fine. And
we appreciate the continuing objection. That's all. Thank you, Your Honor.
Do you have another question?
Yes, Your Honor. But you spoke to professionalism. No matter how we try, Mr.
Here,
doesn't play nice.
I can make my own observations of what the participants are doing. So, do you have a question for this witness?
So the 13 officers that used deadly force, Agent Soraya, they all came in voluntarily at your request, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they were Mirandized, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they gave videotaped interviews at the offices of BCI in December of 2012, shortly after the events of November the 29th, 2012, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And none of them, although it was their right to do so, exercised any right to remain silent and not give a statement, correct?
That is correct.
And if they had so decided, they could have elected not to give a voluntary statement and said thank you and have a nice day, correct?
Yes, sir.
But not one of the 13 officers that used deadly force said that, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And not one of the other officers who was present on the scene when the shooting occurred, not one of them asserted any constitutional right not to give a voluntary statement after being advised of their Miranda rights, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And none of the radio dispatchers asserted their rights to remain silent either, correct?
I don't believe so, sir.
They gave voluntary statements, correct?
They were interviewed and gave statements, yes, sir.
So what's the approximate number, if you recall, Agent Sarai, give or take, we're not holding you to the exact number, but what's the approximate number of Cleveland police officers and Cleveland radio dispatchers who gave taped interviews to BCI?
I believe it was in the 70s.
In the 70s? And would it be a fair statement that probably 99.99% of them were given their Miranda rights?
I believe just about everybody was.
And all of them gave you and other investigators videotaped statements, correct?
They gave statements, yes, sir. I don't know if all of them were videotaped or not.
Oh, there were some that were, let's say, peripheral players, so to speak, and it was determined that they could just do it over. Well, there's some supervisors who did it over the phone, correct?
Yes, sir.
But the patrol officers, let me rephrase that. Were all patrol officers who gave statements, whether they were on video or audio, summoned down to BCI?
Yes, sir.
No patrol officers gave interviews over the phone, correct?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And if there were any, it was a couple.
It would be very few.
Okay. Your Honor, I don't know if this is a good time.
You're going on to another subject at about this point?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's fine by me. So, you are, of course, still under oath, obligated to return to the stand tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We're off the record. So we'll say 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, please. See you then. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So what's the story on why you can't have this camera?
Well, here's